on YouTube.
Good morning and welcome to the International Leadership Conference for June 2021. This conference, which is being webcast worldwide, is one of 3 to be held this summer, highlighting the thinking of leading experts on the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia, and stakeholder parties. The theming of our program over the next 3 days is toward the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. And to start, I'd like to welcome our first speaker for this opening session, Dr. Michael Jenkins, the President of Universal Peace Federation International. Welcome and good morning.
Thank you, Kayleigh, and welcome to our viewing audience throughout America and the world. We're very happy that this International Leadership Conference is being done in partnership with the Europe, Middle East part of UPF. And we're very, very grateful for that collaboration. Our sessions today are experts on Korea on various topics dealing with how peace can be achieved, from the trilateral cooperation of America and ROK and also Japan to European issues related with Russia, the United States, and other stakeholders who have interests in the Middle East and also in Northeast Asia. And the sessions will give you insights and, very interesting understanding by people who are elected officials, members of various think tanks and experts on North and South Korea. Some of the diplomatic community will be also participating with us, and we're very honored to present this program to you. The Universal Peace Federation was founded by Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, together with her husband, Reverend Sum Young Moon, in 2005. It has grown immensely to be over 177 countries now, with members of parliament that are current members of parliament, forming the International Association for Parliamentarians for Peace. It's now 6,500 plus members of parliament, current members, and several thousand more former members of parliament. And we're very honored today that in our opening session, we'll have Congressman Dan Burton, who is the global chairman of the IAPP. The other associations of UPF, which are quite interesting, is those that deal with also the heads of state. Many heads of state from various continents have also joined in this effort. And some are actually those that have diplomatic relations with North Korea. So we welcome their participation in the associations of the UPF. There are also association for religious leaders and also for academicians, as well as people in culture and art, and also the business and media fields. These are all very, very important because they provide different angles and different aspects of engaging North Korea and trying to bring North Korea and South Korea together in peace in such a way that China and Russia will eventually support, and it won't be done by any kind of conflict of violence, but it will be done through natural dialogue and understanding and cooperation. Not an easy task, but certainly America must lead the way in this effort. So very honored to be with you today. I want to thank our chairman, Dr. Thomas Walsh, who has put together this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for your welcoming remarks and for your great leadership for this incredible organization and program we have over the next 3 days. Next, I'd like to welcome up Dr. Chung-Shik Yong, who's the President of Family Federation for World Peace and Unification in North America, for his welcoming remarks.
Distinguished leaders, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored to participate in this International Leadership Conference for the Americas, sponsored by the Universal Peace Federation of North America. The theme of our conference is a tour of peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, peace and security. The focus of our conference is on the urgent situation that exists in Northeast Asia, and in particular, the long-standing 71-year division of North and South Korea. The long battle between communism and the god of forming democracies of the world has now come to last battlefield of struggle. I want to congratulate UPF Chairman Dr. Thomas Walsh and Dr. Michael Jenkins, President of UPF, for this outstanding conference right now. The gathering on peace in Northeast Asia includes congressmen, diplomats, trade leaders, intelligence, business and humanitarian experts, as well as significant scholars and media professionals who will address urgent topics on the critical challenge to peace in the world. The state of relations of the US, China, and Russia will be on panels focus. Another will be on the critical trilateral relations among Korea, Japan, and the United States. Christopher Hill, the US ambassador to Korea, will join US Ambassador Joseph Titurani, will address the possible renewal of the six-party talks. The environmental, economy, and the humanitarian concerns will also be addressed by other panels. All in all, this conference will give great insight to all who love peace and will yield valuable recommendations for the Biden administration for successfully dealing with North Korea and China and Russia. I want to express thanks to Dan Burton, Global Co-Chairman of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, IAPP, and Congressman John Doolittle, North American Chair of IAPP, for their tireless work to make this effort a great success. The co-founder of UPF, Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon, and then her late husband always see that all the aspects of society, from heads of state, the congressmen, leaders in arts and culture, the fields of media, business, and academy all have a role to play in achieving peace between nations. By forming the think tank 2022, the Universal Peace Federation wants every aspect of humanity to engage their counterpart in the war of peace and for a better world. The value of Father and Mother Moon emphasize that understanding God and practicing the principles of love and compassion for all nations to be a guiding light in this effort. Ultimately, family values that recognize that strong marriages and families are the key to build good communities, and nations is always a key to being able to recognize all nations, races, and peoples as part of the global family, all created by God. If we attain God, then inspiration for ways to reconcile enemy nation can be found. The United States and Canada are hosting this North America conference, and the relationship of these two nations is a good model for peace and cooperation. We congratulate Dr. Hakja Han-moon, the founder of UPF, for outstanding leadership in bringing dialogue and understanding that will positively contribute to realization of the peaceful reunification of North and South Korea and peace in Northeast Asia and throughout the world. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Young, especially for that great framing of this ILC and the important work that we're doing. And at this time, we'd like to share a video with all of you about the Universal Peace Federation and especially the Rally of Hope, which is an international program sponsored by UPF and which millions of viewers watch each time we offer this to the world. So now let's view this video to learn more about the work of the Universal Peace Federation.
Today, the world is battling with a global pandemic and fears over long-term environmental damage. National lockdowns have seen an increase in isolation and a growing sense of hopelessness. To address this crisis, Dr. Hakja Han-moon and the Universal Peace Federation initiated an ambitious online program called Rally of Hope, which provides an opportunity for current and former heads of state and government, leading politicians, religious leaders, and Nobel laureates to present their vision for a peaceful and sustainable world. As the rallies have grown, so have their audiences, and they now link millions of people across the globe.
Building partnership across a wide range of sectors is imperative if we are to build a better world. I believe that the Universal Peace Federation and its broad set of partnerships serve as a good model.
I'm honored to address you at this global Rally of Hope, sponsored by the Universal Peace Federation, and join you in the great cause of building a more peaceful and prosperous world. During my 4 years as Vice President, at home and abroad, I've seen firsthand that strong families, education, equal treatment under the law, and a recognition of the dignity and worth of every human life is the foundation of true national greatness. With free people, strong nations, and bold leaders, there's no limit to what we can achieve.
These rallies have created a foundation inviting international and interreligious collaboration in the achievement of peace among our nations. We can transcend the barriers we have created through religion, nationality, cultures, class, creed, and other differences that divide us.
35 years ago, the situation that confronted us in South Africa appeared to be hopeless. We were increasingly isolated, without friends or allies in the world. However, we finally made it to our first fully inclusive elections on 27 April 1994, to the inauguration of President Mandela, and to the adoption of a truly inclusive and democratic constitution. But above all, we have learned the importance of never losing hope.
The upliftment of the common good over and above personal interests is a sure way to eliminating conflict and a pathway to attaining peaceful growth and development in Africa and the world.
We must recognize that history shows that the rights and freedoms of ordinary people are critical to creating and sustaining our prosperity and peace over time. If there is any organization capable of convening a truly global network of people to genuinely shared efforts, then it is this one, the Universal Peace Federation.
The issues being taken up in this rally are indeed critical to the challenges of our time and need to be accorded the highest priority. It is important for us to address them so that this collective effort will reinforce attention on these concerns.
Let us promote a culture of peace and harmony around the world. Let us work to heal the broken trust that has fractured societies. Let us encourage facts and truth instead of hatred and bigotry. Let's also instill a sense of hope and future in our youth.
Back in September 2010, it was, for me as the then Prime Minister, and for my compatriots, such an unforgettable experience to host a delegation of the Universal Peace Federation and of the world-class Little Angel Children's Dance Troupe and Choir in Brussels. Your work is important, your work is crucial, your work is the pathway to a better future, a beacon of hope in these darkest times.
We still have a very long way to go before every child in every part of the world has enough to eat. But the Republic of Korea's story gives me hope for the future. WP started working in the country way back in 1964 in the aftermath of the Korean War, and for 20 years we supported the Korean people with food assistance. And during this period, the country, the people, rebuilt itself from the ground up. In just one generation, the Republic of Korea went from aid recipient to aid donor.
It was important to us that we were making a vaccine for the world and that it should be made widely available with no profit during the pandemic or at any time for vaccine used in low and middle income countries. AstraZeneca shared our vision. This vaccine was made for all of us to protect each other and ourselves.
When I had the honor to receive on behalf of the European Union the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012 in Oslo, I had the occasion to underline the very close link between peace and also the values we have in a society. In a society at all levels, starting with the family. That is our most basic community.
There is one word that has great meaning to us all, and that is the word family. Family is the root of everything we are. Family is what binds us together, and family is the cornerstone of world peace.
많은 종교들이 있습니다. 절대자,
And all these faiths have one purpose. Hence, I sincerely hope that you will let all people know about our Creator and work to realize a world of peace wherein all people live in unity as one family of humankind, one great family under our Heavenly Parent. Please raise your voices and work together for this. I give you my blessing.
What Mother Moon has done in carrying on the work of her husband, in building a worldwide movement committed to the concept that we can find ways to talk with each other, we can find ways to work together, is the key to a successful future. And so I think you taking your time to be involved in this meeting is really important.
More rallies of hope are planned in the coming months, featuring significant world leaders and luminaries. As viewer numbers continue to increase, this forum offers a great chance to inspire and connect people through its twin messages of hope and peace.
Thank you for that great video. It really puts into perspective the incredible network of the Universal Peace Federation and the great need of this work in this time. And with that, I'd like to welcome up Honorable Dan Burton, member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1983 to 2013, and the global co-chairman of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace. Congressman Burton, we're excited to hear your welcoming remarks this morning.
Well, thank you very much. And as usual, you're doing an outstanding job of moderating this. So thank you very much. Let me just start off by saying that Mother Moon and Dr. Walsh have done an outstanding job in getting the UPF organization working so well. It's a well-oiled machine. And I'm very happy to be the co-chairman of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, which has thousands of members from over 100 countries right now. We're working together to try to send a message to leaders throughout the world that the solution to our problems is not a conflict or the threat of a war, but it's peace, trying to find solutions to our problems where we can work together to solve our problems. And one of the things that you may have noticed today is there are leaders from all over the world that are expressing their concern and support for Dr. Walsh, Mother Moon, and the UPF organization, as well as Parliamentarians for Peace, which I chair. Vice President Pence, former Vice President of the United States, is supportive and has spoken. Speaker Newt Gingrich, one of the great leaders of the United States of America, is supportive and has spoken about this. Vice President Dan Quayle, former Vice President of the United States, and of course, the former Secretary of State for the United States has been involved as well. And the point is, leaders from all over the world are showing support for the goals that Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, Mother Moon, has been working towards for a long time. I know of nobody that has worked as hard as she has to try to bring about a solution to our world problems through peaceful negotiations and through conferences with leaders around the world talking about the need to solve our problems in a peaceful way. So let me just say today, I'm happy to be a participant in this program. It's extremely important. And I also want to thank my good friend, Dr. Michael Jenkins, who works so hard along with Larry Moffat, who helps organize all these things. These guys are doing such an outstanding job, and I really appreciate their cooperation and their hard work. So let me just say to the leaders that have spoken today and the others, how much I appreciate what they're doing. I appreciate very much how much Dr. Hak Jahan Moon has been contributing toward the goals of peace in this world. And I thank you all for letting me be with you today. And I hope you'll all continue to participate and work with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Congressman Burton. And we offer our great appreciation for your leadership and support of these efforts. And with that, everybody, we're going to close our opening session with a brief prayer to honor our Creator, if you would join me. Dear most beloved Heavenly Parent, good morning. As we start this important 3-day session, God, we really want to invite you into this time and let your work really take shape through all of us. And we want to offer all these things to you. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody, for joining our opening session. Our next session will start in approximately 9 minutes in this same link, so you can stay here or come back in a few minutes. Our next session will be called The State of Relations Between U.S., China, and Russia. We look forward to seeing you in a few minutes.
Anyone who is here for the next session, please turn on your camera. Some of you may have to rename your screen. So everybody turn on your camera now.
It won't let me. It says the host has stopped it. This is Doug.
Host, can you let them start?
There we go.
Mr. Tolaraya, you want to right click on your screen and you can rename yourself and type in your name.
I can do that for you.
Yes, that's better. I'm not sure.
Kaylee will do it for you.
Okay.
Good to see you, Doug.
Good. Good to see you as well. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Good. You're looking good.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Dr. Toloroyo, could you turn on your video again? I don't know which one you are. Thank you. Okay.
You're muted, Dr. Tolaraya.
Yes, I know. Hi, nice to see you. I'm just trying to move around to make, to find a quiet place because somebody's doing some,
we understand.
Renovation next door.
It's the nature of the Zoom life.
Yeah.
Everyone, welcome. I'm Dr. Michael Jenkins. I'm the president of Universal Peace Federation International, and I'm really happy Mr. Doug Bondo can be with us. He's a very respected expert from the Cato Institute, and thank you, Doug, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. You're very kind.
Very good. We look forward to collaboration. And Dr. Georgi Tolaraya, we're very honored to receive you too, also from our collaboration with the UPF of Europe and the Middle East. They recommended you highly. And of course, they have the Russian UPF that is doing some fine work in Russia. And we're very, very honored to welcome you to our program today. So
thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. It's a pleasure.
And Mr. Guy Taylor, who is the International Security Team Leader for the Washington Times. He's camera's here. He's ready to go in a couple minutes, but he will also be giving some remarks and comments. Our order today will be Mr. Bondo first, and then also then Guy Taylor, and Dr. Toloraya will be the final speaker. Everyone has 7 to 10 minutes. It's however you feel. We will have a period of question and answer. The session goes for a little over an hour. We like to end it by 11:45, or I'm sorry, we'd like to end it at 12 noon, if possible, Eastern time. The schedule originally said 12:30, but we found the hour or 70 minutes is working best. So you have time to speak. We'd like you to speak whatever you feel for up to 7 to 10 minutes is fine, and then we'll have engagement. There'll be there's about 400 people registered for this, some through YouTube, and then we have participants directly online, and they'll be sending us questions, and I'll deliver those questions to you. Mr. Larry Moffat, who you see there, is Secretary General for UPF for North America, and doing a fine job. He'll help us field those questions, give them to me, and I'll be asking them to you, mostly one by one. But I think at that point, our tech team will put us all on the screen. Any questions or any adjustments that are needed for the cameras? And I think we'll be ready in about 5 minutes.
Just gonna play the
Yes, very good. We have a little intro video that we play for the program.
Yep, give me one
start
sec.
Sharp at 11 a.m. Washington time. I think we need the music a little louder.
Yes, give me 1 second.
These are the different sessions that we're having in the conference. Also, to all the panelists, you may leave your camera on the whole time. The YouTube that this is being recorded by will not see those of us who are off screen. And when you are on screen, you'll be spotlighted. So feel free to leave your camera on. It makes it easier so that no one has to, request your turning the camera on again. And you can leave your mic unmuted the whole time too. But just be conscious of the fact that we're live and after 11 a.m. Especially Russia and issues related with the Welcome to our viewing audience. We're honored to welcome you to the International Leadership Conference, which is a global conference held by the Universal Peace Federation. This program is running from today, Thursday, June 24th, through June 26th, Saturday, and has a special session on Tuesday, June 29th. We're very excited about the collaboration among heads of state, members of parliament, and experts on the area of peace, particularly with a focus on North and South Korea. The topic of our program today is the state of relations between the US, Russia, and China in relationship to the possible peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. We realize that only through cooperation of these stakeholder countries, including Japan also, and the ROK, North Korea, Russia, China, and the United States, 6 parties have been engaged for many years. And that cooperation is going to be the key to bringing about a peaceful resolution. We have expert panelists today, Mr. Doug Bondo, and also Mr. Guy Taylor, and Dr. Georgi Talaraya. Our first panelist today is Mr. Doug Bondo. Doug is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, specializing in foreign policy and civil liberties. He worked as a special assistant to President Ronald Reagan and editor of the political magazine Inquiry. He writes regularly for the Washington Times, the Wall Street Journal, Harper's, National Review, New Republic, and all top-level journals of peace and also intelligence. He's also been featured by all the major media, and his column, La Prensa, Economic Freedom and the Press, was syndicated by Copley News. And Mencken Award, he won the Mencken Award for Best Editorial for op-ed column. Doug speaks frequently at academic conferences and also as a commentator on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, ABC, CBS. Dr. Bondo obtained his bachelor's degree in economics from Florida State University, completed his Juris Doctor in Stanford Law School in Palo Alto. He worked in the Reagan administration for several years. In January 2006, Dr. Bondo joined the nonprofit Citizens Outreach as Vice President of Policy. He's a respected expert on the Northeast Asian arena, and we're really excited to hear him now. Welcome, Mr. or Dr. Doug Bondo. Welcome, Doug.
Dr. Jenkins, I thank you very much for having me on this panel. It's a great pleasure to join my fellow panelists and you. We obviously have some very important issues here. When we look at China and Russia, we're looking really at the 2 most important countries that the U.S. has to deal with. And when you put them together, they provide a potential strong combination against the United States. So it's important we try to get these policies right. You look at the Cold War. We were afraid in 1949 when China's revolution happened that we would have to face the Soviet Union and China together. And we were lucky in the 1960s when they had a falling out. In 1972, Richard Nixon had his famous trip to China, met Mao Zedong, opened up a relationship. and help pull China and the Soviet Union apart. And that was very important. Geopolitically, it helped separate two of these very important powers that the US was dealing with at the same time. And that really did transform the relationship. And the danger is today, it looks like we may be reversing that. That is unintentionally, we are pushing these countries back together where we once were able to separate them. I think we see a friendly relationship between the two. Now, it's not a military alliance, that China especially would be very careful about that. They have very different interests in some cases. The issue of Siberia, for example, Russia has a lot of concern, not a very populated area. China likes all those resources, concern about, potential transformation of the Far East. There are differences in Central Asia. It used to be part of the Soviet Union. China now has a lot of economic interests there and really is pushing Russia aside in certain ways. On intellectual property is an issue where the Russians have faced some of the same problems that we have in dealing, with China. You look at even more fundamentally, who is the senior partner? When there was the Chinese Revolution, it was the Soviet Union, it was Moscow. Today, it very much looks like Beijing is a senior partner. So there's a lot there that kind of keeps these countries apart. But at the moment, their concern about the US, their bad relationships with the US have helped push them together. And the danger is that we are allowing our policy towards them to kind of overcome the natural reluctance they have dealing with each other. And I think it's important to realize nothing is set here. Now, there are some folks out there who say that in many ways we can't do much about it. On one side, there are people who argue that in the end, Russia will realize that it can't trust China, that it doesn't matter what they're doing today, that in the end, Russia will move our way, that Moscow will decide it's better to be with the US and Europe than with China. And that's certainly possible, but there's nothing guaranteed. At the moment, at least, Vladimir Putin is quite happy, to meet with Xi Jinping and to have them work together, to accept that they have some differences, but nevertheless view them as important allies working together against us. The second side argues that there's nothing really we can do, that they're always going to be together. And I think, again, that makes the same mistake, that nothing's guaranteed, that both of these are very practical powers. I mean, neither of them is a communist country in the old Marxist-Leninist sense. Russia is very nationalistic. China is formally communist. I'd argue it's much more Leninist than Marxist-Leninist if you look at its economy and the way it behaves. So ideology doesn't drive them together. What pulls them together is antagonism towards the US, but that obviously can change. We have choice, we have agency here. And I think we want to then look at our policies very carefully in terms of, can we do things to try not to push these countries together? They're very unlikely to form a formal military alliance. Nevertheless, if you look around the world, if they work together, there's a lot they can do together. They support each other, whether it be in the UN, geopolitically, economically, in terms of energy. There are a lot of areas that they can be a fairly potent counterpoint to the United States. If you look overall, China is the greater concern for us. It's the much bigger power. It has the larger economy. But Russia, we don't want to underestimate. Russia, I would argue, is a great power. It's not a superpower. It's no longer a globe-spanning power the way the Soviet Union was, but it's rebuilt its military. It has a significant nuclear threat. Its economy has, despite sanctions, has started to rebound some. This is a country that, one has to take into account as well as China. If you look at Russia, we have these days a very bad relationship, though the president had what appeared to be at least a fairly civil summit with Vladimir Putin. It's not the Cold War, but I think that it's important to realize that there are some very important differences between us, but not to oversell them, that there are opportunities here, I think, to try to work through at least enough of those that we can get the relationship on a somewhat better level. It's a great power, and I think it wants to be treated like a great power. In many ways, I think that's the biggest issue here. It wants to be respected. It wants to have a say in international relations, very concerned about its own security. And I don't see existential threats from it to the United States. I don't see the idea that Russia has any interest in war against us. We don't covet the same territory. What we see is Russia being very sensitive in terms of Europe, very nervous about whether countries like Ukraine and Georgia go into NATO. In many ways, I think that's probably the most important issue for them. There are other issues out there where we clash, but they tend to be more peripheral. What happens in Syria, for example, issues of North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. These issues matter, but they're not central really to either country. I think important are the issues of cybersecurity, cyber attacks, and elections. And they also, they're very bad on human rights. So this, of course, is no change, frankly, from the Soviet Union. So we need to look at can we come up with some kind of modus vivendi to live together? I mean, and I think of ideas, for example, we promise that Ukraine and Georgia don't go into NATO and they get out of Donbass. I mean, is this a discussion that we might come up with that would help us stabilize Eastern Europe? I don't think they're going to give up Crimea, but we might come up with a compromise where we're going to keep sanctions on Crimea itself, but we're going to accept the fact they're likely to keep it, and we can move on to other issues. Issues of countries of Syria and others we're likely to disagree on, but there may be trades there we can make. They stay out of Venezuela. We're not so concerned about what they do in Syria. I mean, I think there are places we can talk about some of these issues. I think cyber issues may be the biggest for us. These are threatening significant issues, as well as election interference, though, frankly, we have to recognize we do that too. We've interfered in a lot of elections, including the Russian election in 1996. So I think a little less sanctimony on our part would help. Human rights is always going to be a tough issue. They're not going to change that policy, I think, for us. We're going to have to confront them on the issue and accept the fact we're not likely to change them dramatically. My hope is that we can look at some of these issues and try to at least reduce the hostility that we see, and in a way that we don't push them quite so clearly towards China. I think China is going to be a much tougher issue in many ways. China is the bigger issue for us, a much larger economy, a growing military, globe-spanning interests, much greater connections with, frankly, our allies and with friendly countries. All of these issues become much more complicated. The security issues, I think, are not direct against us. That is, no one imagines the Chinese will attack us directly. It's an issue of U.S. domination of East Asia. And I think what we have to realize here in both Russia and China is we are expecting them to accept us intervening in their neighborhood in ways that we would never accept them doing to us. Imagine if the Soviet Union had invited Mexico to join the Warsaw Pact, the U.S. would have been very unhappy. Imagine if the Chinese Navy was steaming up the East Coast, the U.S. would not be happy. So we have to realize that these are going to create tensions between us. It's going to create problems for us. We have to decide how to try to work through those. I mean, what are we willing to do in terms of Taiwan? Are there ways to try to, kind of bring these issues, down a little bit in terms of on both sides, de-escalating? Question of security, so the territorial claims in East Asia, they're not our claims, they're our friends' claims. How involved are we going to be in those? A lot of economic issues, obviously, the President Trump got into, trade, intellectual property theft, cyber issues. I mean, there's a whole host of those issues as well. We will do better if we can work with our friends on those, the Europeans and Asian countries, put all of us together. We have a lot more clout dealing with China. We need to look for cooperative areas. I think ultimately we want to play a long game with both these countries. I think young people change things. I think if you look at what's going on in China, they have a lot of their own weaknesses. Actually a population about to shrink, an old population, a country that might grow old before it grows rich. We want to open up information avenues in both these places. We want young people especially to have information, to be able to change the future, recognize their weakness. Even China has some significant weaknesses economically, politically. These are not 800-pound gorillas. Let's play a long game here. Let's find ways to try to help transform them internally. And let's emphasize peace. At this century, what's critical is both these countries are very serious powers. So are we. This century will be a far better place if we avoid conflict with both of them. So we need to work on that, emphasize that, recognize we have differences, find ways to settle those differences together and settle them peacefully, even if we are still somewhat at odds. It's going to be a great challenge. It's one I believe that we are up to. And I think this foundation and discussions like this will be helpful in that endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bondo. We really, really thank you for this expert wisdom and experience. And I feel hope from your discussion. And there always is hope. And that's how the Universal Peace Federation and the Washington Times Foundation, our co-sponsor, sees this. We want to find the elements of cooperation. Our next speaker today, Mr. Guy Taylor, is the National Security Team Leader for the Washington Times. He's an award-winning foreign correspondent overseeing the Times State Department and intelligence community coverage. Mr. Taylor has engaged extensively in international reporting over the last 20 years from Latin America to the Middle East and Asia Pacific. His exhaustive and deep dive coverage of U.S. policy towards North Korea and also crisis areas has won accolades from across the political spectrum. His reporting on security, political, and economic developments in Mexico won a Virginia Press Association award. His reporting on Russia's attempts to influence the 2016 U.S. election was recognized by the Gerald Ford Journalism. He received the Journalism Prize from the Gerald Ford Institute, distinguished reporting on the presidency. Yesterday, Guy published in the Washington Times a very important article on North Korea's rejection of the Biden administration's efforts to engage in dialogue. And we're very happy to present to you Mr. Guy Taylor of the Washington Times. Welcome, Guy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. I presume you'll tell me if you can't hear me clearly. It's an honor to be on this esteemed panel. I enjoyed Doug Bandau's comments right then, and thank you to the Universal Peace Federation and to this International Leadership Conference. I think these dialogues are immensely important to promoting peace and understanding what's going on in the world. I have just a few framing remarks. I'll try to go through them succinctly. I think it's very important to consider that great power interaction between the U.S. and China and what was the Soviet Union until 1991 and now with Russia has been occurring and evolving for many decades. In the modern realm, a good place to start is the early years of post-revolution China, which would really be the early 1950s as the U.S.-Soviet Cold War was first emerging as the sort of organizing bedrock of global security or power arrangements. As we look at today's landscape in 2021, whether we're talking about the global economy or global trade, ideological alliances, or military conflicts between authoritarian autocracies or democracies or military friction or new aspects of the information age, who controls the tip of the spear of artificial intelligence, for instance, who ultimately wields control over the elusive informational instrument of power, as it's been called. As the 21st century progresses, I think it's wise to slow down and consider the history of the past 70 years or so as it relates to this three-way dynamic that we're trying to understand right now between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. Alignments between the US and Russia, the US and China and Russia have really shifted repeatedly during those 7 decades. Whether it was the early China-Soviet alignment that Doug has just mentioned, actually when Mao Zedong reached out to Moscow for clandestine Russian help in starting China's nuclear weapons program in the early 1950s. Or then the period of cooling by the late 1950s when the Chinese pushed the Soviets away following some warm symmetry between Dwight Eisenhower and Nikita Khrushchev. I think in 1959, Khrushchev came to the White House, or came to Washington. And this kind of reversal again, just 12 years later during Nixon's 1971 trip to China, a moment when Washington sought closer alignment with China to gain leverage over the Soviets. That, of course, came after years of mounting US-Soviet Cold War friction following the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. If we were to jump ahead a couple of decades, we get to the end of the US-Soviet Cold War in 1991. This was a monumental moment in the evolution of contemporary global power dynamics. I actually think this early Cold War history is instructive if we're looking for ways to understand today, in this kind of current moment of heightened concern in Washington over China's rise as an increasingly dominant economic power and an increasingly elusive global military power. To put it one way, we're really now in the midst of a new era where the dynamics have shifted again and the risks of conflict are very real. I think if we consider or if we look at the realists, so to speak, if we consider Graham Allison's famous essay 6 years ago in a subsequent book that Allison wrote, it's called the Thucydides Trap. Are the US and China headed for war? This was a reference to the Greek philosopher, journalist Thucydides, who wrote of the Athenian war against Sparta, ancient Greece, right? And the general principle is that the trap of war is nearly inevitable if we look at human history when a rising power really rivals a ruling power. And in this case, the US being the ruling power and China being the rising power. Most economists around the world agree at this point that Chinese economic power will dramatically outstrip that of the US by 2050, if not sooner. Of course, I think there's a tendency to exaggerate those kind of predictions, so it's debatable. I certainly think it's debatable, but it's something to consider as we try to get a clear snapshot of what the future may hold. Predictions about China's continuing rise bring questions about three-way US-China dynamics going forward. In my reporting for the Washington Times, I could see very clearly that this three-way dynamic loomed over the recent Biden-Putin summit. I heard it in conversations with strategic advisors to the Biden administration, and I could see it, and actually wrote a couple of stories about this recently. I could see it in Chinese and Russian state media or propaganda reports during the days immediately leading up to the summit, where we saw this kind of concerted Russian-Chinese effort to project unity between Moscow, or an image of unity between Moscow and Beijing against the United States. This was interesting because recent years have seen a growing US intelligence push to try and gently drive a wedge between Russia and China, or to perhaps win the Russians over to the US side, or convince Moscow that it may not be in Russia's interest at this moment in history to cozy up with China strategically. From the Biden administration's perspective, and I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon here, but from the Biden administration's perspective, there are many in the administration who believe this is a lost cause, that the Russians under Vladimir Putin are going to act in their own interests, not in Washington's, and if anything, they're bent on trying to undermine Washington's interests. With that in mind, the Biden administration appears to be eager to try and ease US-Russian tensions, at least, in various theaters around the world, most notably the Middle East, Syria, and also Eastern Europe, Ukraine, albeit to a lesser degree in Latin America, Venezuela. But the goal, I think, is to try and free up US foreign policy bandwidth to focus more exclusively on China, and efforts to work with other partners such as major Asian democracies, India, Japan, and Australia, toward really countering China's rise without being so distracted or sucked into quagmire proxy conflicts against the Russians, such as we saw for years in Syria, and we've seen in Libya recently, and a few other theaters. That being said, I think the third and kind of final element to all of this right now that's very important, it has to do with what used to be called nuclear arms control, but increasingly gets referred to today as just strategic stability. Strategic stability basically means the set of agreements that prevent the US and Russia from lobbing nuclear bombs at each other, or just generally racing to make more and more nuclear weapons and more advanced weapons. There's a problem right now in 2021 where the nuclear arms control architecture built up between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War and then held in place between Russia and the US during the initial aftermath of the Cold War it's now eroding, and it's become obsolete in the face of increasingly sophisticated weaponry being tested and deployed, not only by the Russians, but particularly in the past 10 years by the Chinese. They were never considered a great enough power to have been previously sewn into the established arms control architecture of the past. And this was actually a motivating factor behind the Trump administration's abandoning and the Russian abandonment of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, in 2019. The fact that China was not part of it and may well right now be deploying intermediate range forces around Asia or other parts of the world. This has also been a factor behind the slowness of US-Russian attempts to update the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. It's called START, that Biden and Putin have agreed in recent months to essentially punt or keep on the back burner these renegotiation of START for at least the next 5 years. China is not party to START. China has more than 300 nuclear warheads. In the past, nobody really cared about that because China was not a great economic power. But now that China is becoming a great economic and diplomatic and increasingly informational power, talking about cyber and artificial intelligence, regardless of its human rights abuses, its lack of media freedoms, its sort of monolithic authoritarian communist government, it is a great power with nuclear weapons. And so it should bear the great responsibility of becoming beholden to the same nuclear arms control and reduction agreements that the other great powers are beholden to. Possibly Russia and the US could see eye to eye on that. And of course, China has so far resisted any talk from Washington or Moscow about pushing China to be part of a new INF or part of a new START treaty. I'm going to conclude here by staying on this issue of nuclear weapons. I believe we have to take into consideration the immediate nuclear crisis in Northeast Asia, which is that involving North Korea, a rogue state that has built nuclear weapons for decades in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. North Korea has a border with just two countries other than South Korea, and those two countries are China and Russia. So any look at solving the North Korea crisis has to take into consideration the US-China-Russia dynamic, as China and Russia both support North Korea. A question I often ask as a journalist writing about the day-to-day, week-to-week developments in geopolitics is, what is the strategic benefit for China and Russia to keep the North Korea crisis going? In other words, to not work with Washington toward pressuring the Kim regime in Pyongyang to denuclearize. It's an important question, and it's a vexing question. It's difficult to answer with clarity beyond saying that for sure the North Korea issue will continue to be there in the midst of the evolving US-China-Russia dynamic. I hope we can dive further into this issue and in the Q&A session coming here. I also want to say I enjoyed Doug Bandau's comments a few minutes ago about how young people change things. You know, that does give hope that the coming generations may seek peace in this dynamic. And I think it's important to talk about that as a possibility. I'm going to conclude on that. I look forward to what others have to say, and I thank you very much for including me here.
Thank you, Guy. Excellent presentation. And one point we did see from the Washington Times fact finders, there has been a dramatic change in the younger generation attitudes towards North Korea and also towards America, in a very positive way towards America. In the early part of the Bush administration, 2002, the George W. Bush administration, there were some tragic incidents that occurred in America and South Korea in terms of the youth could not be further apart. But somehow efforts made to really be more inclusive and careful to communicate well have opened that door. Also, the youth in South Korea do not see North Korea as a model of hope for the future when they see that the lights are out at night and you can't see much there in terms of the development of that nation. We'd like to see the development of that nation. The youth definitely play a great role. Thank you, Guy, for your excellent insights and comments and expertise. Next, we have a special guest, Dr. Georgi Toloraya is a former diplomat, rank of minister, and a scholar with decades-long experience on Asia and global issues. He concurrently is the director of Asian Strategy Center at the Institute of Economy of Russian Academy of Science, and he serves as CEO of the Russian National Committee on BRICS research. Since 2008, he has been working for the Russky Mir, which is Russian World, Presidential Foundation in Moscow as chair of project and analysis, coordinating inter-Asian and African programs. Professor Toloraya also teaches at the Moscow University of International Relations. He served 2 postings in North Korea, one in 1977 to 1980 and 1984 to 1987. He worked for trade promotion agencies related to Asia, served at the Russian Foreign Ministry, was deputy chief of the Russian embassy in South Korea, and part of the first Asian department, deputy director general and consul general of Russia in Sydney, Australia. He collaborated with a number of academic institutes, including IMEMO and the Institute of Economics as a full-time and part-time researcher. In 2007 to 2008, he became a visiting fellow for the prestigious Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Published many articles and books. He's definitely a renowned expert. And Dr. Toloraya, we are honored to receive you at this time. We want to thank our UPF of Russia and Europe and the Middle East, Mr. Jacques Marion, and also Mark Brand for introducing you to our forum. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. And I would like to be as brief as possible because I presume the topic of today's conference is more not the relation between the great powers, but how they influence the Korean situation, because the Korean unification is the thing we're talking about. Reacted to Doug and Guy's presentations, which very adequately, I think, represent US point of view, I would just be brief to say that it's not fully compatible with Russian point of view. I don't represent an official institution, but what I see from the narrative in Russia and from a broader perspective, including those in BRICS countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The overwhelming view is a little bit different. And that was especially shown during the COVID era, which in fact saw the rise of nationalism and isolationism in many countries, and the disruption of the overall global order. And so what we see is that the old post-liberal world order is given place to something new, which we don't know yet how it will look like. The greatest discrepancy between these countries, BRICS countries, and for example, and US point of view is that US still considers to be the dominant, the leader of the world. Well, it certainly is the leader of the part of the world, of the Western world, but it cannot fully be called a unilateral power of today's global situation. There are several centers with different influence, but the world has already become multipolar, and it will be increasingly do so. Of course, the rise of China is most spectacular, and I appreciate guys mentioned Thucydides, well, this danger of war But well, I think that it can be prevented. Because well, China will continue rise, even if somebody would try to stop at economic development. It's the biggest country in the world in population terms. It has now their own technological base. So regardless of its cooperation with the West, it will grow. Maybe not so spectacular, but will continue to grow. And well, I personally like more about China, that it surely wants to increase its clout, its role in international affairs, but it do not try to force its rules, political system, or way of life on others. And thus it might not become the leader of the world, the unipolar center of the world like US used to be. And this is reassuring. And now with this growing confrontation, and some people in Russia call it pre-war situation, which is very unfortunate, there is a strong stimulus for Russia and China to get closer together. Because, well, actually, unlike Russia, unlike US and China, who have this, well, existential contradiction of who is the boss in this world, US and Russia do not have that kind of contradictions. We can cooperate, although any ideas that Russia can be driven away from China now, they're very ill-based. And I would tell frankly that Putin's government is very consistent in that. And just to disappoint somebody, even if we imagine that Putin would leave the political scene and there would be free election in Russia, I think that anybody who will come to his place will be even more nationalistic and more, authoritarian than we have now. That's democracy. That's the will of the people. So, well, how does this influence the Korean situation? I would say that the Korean situation, that both Russia and China are very close in appraising the Korean situation and the prospects of the developments in Korean Peninsula, because both countries have a long history of cooperation with North Korea. Well, Russia, USSR, in fact, created this country, and they're interested in keeping the status quo at its borders, because, well, actually, when they speak about these contradictions, it's not Russian aircraft carriers or Russian warships which are raiding the ocean near Florida, but it's British ship which goes into Russian territorial waters. So obviously, Russia feels concerned about that. Therefore, the Korea, which is across the river from both Russia and China, not across the ocean like US, it's a sort of a place where both Russia and China would keep quiet and transform, rather than have a crisis, even if the situation after unification would become more beneficial. And in fact, due to the recent events, North Korea has strengthened its position to the extent that the possibility of war conflicts here has diminished. Well, whether do we like it or not, but North Korea, it's both its human rights violations and its self-sustainable economy due to COVID became less a strange thing to the rest of the world, because that's what actually many countries are doing. Moreover, North Korea have become self-sufficient in its defense, because well, the missile and nuclear shield it has created, it's a strong deterrent against well, any attack from outside. And I don't believe that North Korea is still thinking about, well, attacking somebody like, well, conquering South Korea, unless, of course, provoked. But this is something that we can keep a lead on. Well, in fact, North Koreans now consider that they have sort of strategic parity with the United States. And maybe this period in the post-war, or at least post-Cold War history in Korean Peninsula is one of the most stable, because this confrontational stability suggests that if nobody makes some great provocations, the situation could go like this for years and maybe decades. So it's the best of the worst scenarios, I think. Actually now, US de facto sees North Korea as a nuclear power, as a nuclear state. Although, of course, nobody, neither US nor China nor Russia will ever recognize this legally, because it will undermine the NPT regime. But still, in the political calculations, there's, I think, very little hope for denuclearization. What we can talk about now is arms control and arms reduction, but denuclearization is something that should be declared. But I don't think that denuclearization of Korean Peninsula could come before the denuclearization of the other countries and a radical, drastic reduction in the nuclear arms affecting world politics, which I do not think will necessarily increase stability. That means that we have to recognize this reality, and what I think that U.S. new administration, Biden administration might be considering. But North Koreans, of course, they're showing that they're not that they do not need any diplomacy. They do not need any foreign help or cooperation, which complicates things and raises the stakes. However, I should say that Russia and China see very close eye to eye on that. They want to engage North Korea. They want to diminish the level of threat in Korean Peninsula. And while sanctions are concerned, I've got the feeling that China, well, is doing lots of assistance to North Korea. Actually, I know from UN materials that there are hundreds of ships going in and out from North Korea, exporting prohibited commodities and importing them, including coal and petroleum. So Chinese support does give North Korea the possibility to move on. And the relations with South Korea are not so good, but this is North Korean choice, because now they have the government that will really is the best ever in relation to North Korea. What North Koreans want is they want some kind of a meaningful and equal dialogue with the United States, not just simply well, the tit for tat, action for action approach, but a general one which was tried under Trump, but it didn't succeed. So North Koreans now they say they don't settle for some small things. They want some bigger and more general approach in recognizing them as a separate state, as a well, equal state, and this can lead to some of the reduction in tensions and a risk reduction. Well, I don't know how it will work out, but one thing is clear for me, that that none of the countries of the great powers we're talking about really see the prospect for Korean unification in near future. Fortunately or not, but we still, most of us presume that there will be Korean states, and in fact, two Korean sub-nations or sub-ethnoses, for a long time to come. And this is the reality we should think. And the best possible scenario in my mind is, well, some kind of evolution of North Korea to become a normal or, well, conventional country, conventionalization, that I call it, cooperating with South Korea and cooperating with its neighbors. But to get there, we should, there is a need to diminish the sense of danger and the feeling of threat North Koreans feel. And the only way is here to join hands between at least three great powers, and also maybe with the participation of other six-party talks members. Thank you. I think I've done. Use my time already. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tolaraya. And I'd like to ask our team to put all three panelists on together with me so that we can have some discussion here. And I'd like the panelists all unmute their microphones. We have quite a number of questions coming in. And I might say our team just informed me that over 100 Russians have registered and are participating in the program, either by YouTube or by direct Zoom link. Very honored to welcome our Russian participants and also audience. In fact, I might turn to a question from Russia right away. Dmitry has sent us some very good questions. Tatiana, the musician in St. Petersburg, Russia, says that World War II, my father was a pilot and they were shipping airplanes from Alaska to Russia over the Bering Strait. Our contacts with the people in America was always very friendly. We should go beyond discussing personal Putin-Biden politics. Can we do that? Can the presenters propose people-to-people friendship projects to improve U.S.-Russia balance? Can Russia join in friendship? Dr. Mondo, could you respond to that? What are the potential of Russia and the U.S. Becoming friendly again and working together?
Well, the starting point, which thankfully President Putin and President Biden picked up, was having ambassadors back in the embassy. And what we've got to do is reverse the policy of the last several years, where every time an issue came up, we engaged in sending people home. It was retaliation. It was a penalty. We need to talk to each other. So I think the starting point is to have fully staffed embassies that are able to talk to government officials and to private people. We want to have visas provided. Both the Russian embassy in the US, the American embassy in Moscow have trouble. The consulates actually providing visas to people. We want people to visit one another. And I agree. I think what's extraordinarily important is to have people contact, because again, the transformation. I mean, Guy mentioned this idea that of young people of having kind of transforming societies. We want people involved. We want them to know what's going on. We want them to engage one another. And I think those ties are extraordinarily important, and they should be in business. They should be in culture. They should be in all manner of kind of human life, tourism. All of these things I think are advantageous. So I would like to see what Presidents Putin and Biden agreed to as the start, that we can at least start reversing this assumption that the other side is evil. That our ties with Russia go back a very long time. They go back much before the Soviet Union. They go back into the 1800s. They were very friendly in those years. The Russian Empire was friendly with the Union, and the question of during the Civil War. So those contacts, I think we should look at and try to revive and remember the wartime partnership in World War II. Politics is not everything. We need to be able to look at things beyond that.
Very good, Guy. Any comment?
Yeah, I think that it's
America can cooperate.
Yeah, I do. I think it's. I think there's a question about whether or not the Russian and U.S. governments should be facilitating these dialogues and exchanges by granting things like more education-based visas to both sides, or encouraging or financing or providing incentives for younger people to experience for Russians to come to the United States or for Americans to spend time in Russia? Or is this something that can be left to private organizations and the private side of civil society? There's always a bit of a rub there. Is it something where an organization like the Cato Institute, Doug, could be more engaged in joint dialogue and programs with Russian civil society organs, whether those Russian civil society organs were connected to the Russian government or not? I think the US-India dialogues of the last 10 years or so, the United States government and the Indian government agreed at the top level to begin a process of 2+2 dialogues. And there are some dialogues like that between the US and Russia, but I think there should be more. And I think American universities can play a bigger role in this, and so can Russian universities. So I'm a major proponent of it, and I also I'm a major proponent of Georgi Toleraya's point of how can we get beyond just the Biden-Putin level discussion here and look at this sort of much deeper connection between the US and Russia. And it's an economic connection as well. I mean, remember, despite Russia's economic struggle or the portrayal of that struggle in the American media at the moment, Russia remains a pretty major potential market for some big transnational American companies, whether it's Ford Motors or Apple Computers, you name it. They all want to do business in Russia. So there's an economic component to this as well. And I think it requires an initiative by whoever's in power in Washington and in the Kremlin. And just to finish this thought, there's trouble with that because it also requires a certain behavior by the leadership. And when the US intelligence community agrees across the board, regardless of who's in the White House, that the Putin government meddled in the 2016 election or tried to manipulate social media, or that I go as a journalist and I interview the recently retired chief of U.S. counterintelligence in the Directorate of Intelligence in Washington, and he tells me there's no doubt that if Russian intelligence wanted, it could stop the wave of ransomware attacks hitting U.S. agencies and companies. That type of thing erodes American trust in the pursuit of things like civil society dialogue with Russian organizations. So there's an issue of transparency and the need for responsibility and leadership on both sides.
Dr. Toleraya, questions come in. Does Russia support North Korea having ICBM and deliverable warheads that could strike the United States? Does Russia want to see this? We understand China doesn't want to see this. It could lead to more proliferation and development. What's Russia's view on possible, development of the deliverable warheads?
Well, we're absolutely against it. Well, both by the reasons that that would raise tension, and because it would undermine the deterrent, the Russian-owned deterrent, nuclear and missile deterrent. So we're absolutely against it, and we never hesitated to tell North Koreans in very clear terms about that. So this is just absolutely clear position. But may I also comment on the previous U.S. speakers about people-to-people exchanges. When I grew up in Soviet Union, United States was seen as a sort of, not as exactly as the beacon, but as a sort of example to follow. And we enjoyed, the U.S. culture, U.S. music. I remember how happy I was when I got myself my first pair of American jeans, And it's sort of changed in 1990s because Russian public was very much eager to embrace, to be a part of this free world. But instead, many people felt that they were downgraded, that Russia was downgraded to a secondary power, which is very offensive to Russians. And also democracy, it's become a sort of curse and reward in Russia, because democracy that we had in 1990s, it's really meant the rule of gangsters and, well, some filthy politicians. So I think that should be understood that now there is a lot of suspicion in general public against the U.S. Citizens, and any private people-to-people contacts are seen just a vehicle to get to influence a Russian internal situation. And most of the people think that U.S. wants a revolution in Russia, that they want to change the regime, and we had enough of revolutions. We're fed up with changes of the regime. So whatever people may think of the current regime, it doesn't want US to meddle into its internal affairs. But of course, I support the need for more exchanges and more free movement of people. Well, I myself am now in New York, and I cannot get my family in here because they cannot get the visa. So this is something outrageous. And I think that the current in relations, improvement of the relations, could make room for more exchanges, and between NGOs as well. Because now in Russia, the NGO which is supported by US is seen as a sort of a spy agency. And I think the same is in US, because, well, organizations like Russian TV, Russia Today, or others are seen as a sort of a government instrument to undermine the US by propaganda. So this is the reality which I think we should be overcome.
Thank you. This is a question for all the participants. There is reported mass starvation going on again in North Korea. Food production has dropped to the lowest rate for many years. And why can't China just step in and make sure there's ample food to be able to survive? Why doesn't Russia or China or the United States step in? Any comments from any of our panel?
Well, North Korea is very independent. It's always played the Soviet Union and Russia versus China. It takes very seriously the historic sense of being the shrimp among whales. I think one reason it's wanted to have an opening with the US is to have a little more independence. And they have essentially closed themselves off with the COVID pandemic. And there's been somewhat more opening, we think, in terms of trade and stuff more recently. They have really shut themselves off, and they're very hesitant to admit to the world the problems they have. Kim Jong-un just gave a speech to the Workers' Party of Korea talking about food tensions, and more ominously, he talked about an arduous march, which is how they referred to the famine from the 1990s. So I think that there's a very real danger there. I think this is an area where Russia, China, and the US could work together. The question of how to put together an aid program and how to approach North Korea in a way that the North would not feel its sovereignty to be threatened, but to indicate a willingness of all three countries to help it. I think it's scary. If the 1990s were a horrid time for North Korea, we don't have much sense of what's going on right now because there aren't many foreigners in. Many of the embassies have closed. The aid workers have been sent home or have left. But the rhetoric we're hearing, I think, is very, very concerning. And it's an area I hope we can do something on.
Dr. Tolaraya?
Well, unfortunately, the North Korean regime authorities has now more as a priority to keep in control inside the country, and, well, actually passing to a new stage of centralized economic governance, then, well, to the well-being of the population. Because Either China or Russia, we have, in fact, suggested that they cannot get inside their aid into North Korea because the borders are closed. So North Koreans just says to us, "Thank you. No, we will survive." And they say to the U.S. and South Korea, "Well, we don't need you at all." So this is the reality. I don't know how to change it. The situation should be quite difficult now, and I'm a little bit concerned about the possible instability, because unlike in the 1990s, they were farming, the people didn't know other way of life. Now they have got some experience of a better life. So I'm not really sure why North Koreans are doing this or how it can be overcome, but the situation is not so good.
Thank you. That's excellent. We agree. We have some further sessions in this 3-day conference that are going to touch on exactly that point. Guy, the proposal, Dr. Tolaraya mentioned it, and Doug, if you could comment. This has been a long-standing discussion about denuclearization, and that North Korea will never stop its quest for nuclear weapons until the other parties all denuclearize. And what are the possible steps to even looking at that issue? I know it's some people wouldn't even look at it, but eventually there has to be a more safe situation around the world. We're right now using balance of power, but what steps would be done to all three of our panelists to even discuss ending the nuclear era?
I could take this one. I think before I do, and I'll be very brief, I just want to add something about my agreement with Georgie and Doug that it actually is the Kim regime in Pyongyang that's got rules in place to prevent the movement of humanitarian aid into North Korea. And I just want to point out why, because I sometimes think we blow past why does the Kim regime stop humanitarian aid from going into its own people. It's because there's a very deep fear in the regime that the Americans and the South Koreans and possibly even the Chinese and the Russians are going to use the humanitarian aid channel to sneak communications devices and Western or some sort of revolutionary propaganda into North Korea. It's important to remember that. And I think that there are efforts, particularly by the South Koreans, and they get criticized in Washington a lot, to try and give assurances to the North that if the Kim regime opens the channel of humanitarian aid, that channel will not be exploited to move these kind of things into North Korea. That aside, with regard to what steps could be taken immediately or initially, I think if we look at the Singapore summit and the Hanoi summit and the takeaways, the way these summits are portrayed in mainstream American media is that they failed to produce a denuclearization agreement. That may be so, but these summits were historic, not just because of the optics that Donald Trump, the US president, was meeting with the head of Chairman Kim, the head of the North Korean government. They were also historic because there were things that came about. And one of the things that came about was a very clear understanding of the North Korean demand that the United States also denuclearize. And there's all this debate about what does that mean? And I think the first thing that it means, or the interpretation, the consensus of North Korea watchers in the US government and intelligence community and civil society, is that it means reducing the US nuclear deterrence shield in Northeast Asia. Not the US giving up all its nuclear weapons, but pulling back or proving that there are not US nuclear weapons based in South Korea, that there are not US nuclear weapons based on ships floating around in waters near North Korea, that there are not US nuclear weapons based in Japan, that there are not US nuclear weapons based in Guam even. That, I think, is what the North Koreans are referring to. And the Trump administration would pay a little bit of lip service to acknowledging that that's what the North Koreans were referring to. The Biden administration hasn't touched it at all, and the American side doesn't want to touch that because the American side knows that the presence of that nuclear shield is there not just for North Korea, it's also there for China and for Russia, that the United States has the nuclear weapons in the region because of perceived threats from both Beijing and Moscow.
I mean, I would suggest that we maintain a clear desire for denuclearization, but we look for smaller deals that, in a sense, are arms control. And I think the Hanoi summit offered that in the sense that, Chairman Kim suggested closing down Yongbyon. He wanted sanctions relief. We can argue how much sanction relief he deserved, but that strikes me, that's diplomacy. That is the negotiation. You sit down and you say, we like the idea of seeing Yongbyon closed down. You want this, we're prepared to give this, try to come to some conclusion where what you're achieving is you're reducing the danger. And to my mind, then let's be on the road that moves us towards denuclearization. And honestly, if we get to a point where we've capped a North Korean program, we've limited their production, we've put restraints on potential proliferation, I'm going to be much less concerned. What scares me now is the Rand Corporation and the Son Institute have a report out that say by 2027, North Korea could have 200 nuclear weapons. That is a scary number. So to my mind, our priority should be making sure that doesn't happen. Let's make sure it doesn't go to 200. I'd love to get it to 0, but the starting point is making sure it doesn't go up. And I think that the Singapore summit, the statement had also a sense of indicating the importance of better bilateral relations, the importance of the regional environment. That I'm skeptical of how committed is Chairman Kim to actually give all of the nuclear weapons away. But certainly he's not going to do so if he doesn't think he can trust the U.S. and trust the environment committed. So again, that gives us an impetus to say, how do we have a better relationship in which it is more believable to him that he is more secure giving up nuclear weapons and keeping them? And to me, that's the ultimate goal. We have to convince them they are better off and more secure not having nuclear weapons than having them. That's not going to be easy, but we need to work hard at that because the alternative is a very different environment that is not good for any of us.
Ambassador Christopher Hill, former ambassador to Korea, with U.S. Head of the six-party delegation from the United States. Also, Ambassador Joe DeTrani, they're going to be on tomorrow. They're both advocating to the Biden administration engagement and dialogue. What do our panelists here think? And starting with Dr. Georgi, what do you think about the six-party talks resuming?
Yes, thank you. First, I would like to comment on the first issue. Well, I think we have to learn to live with North Korea as a nuclear power. And I don't think that, under Kim Jong-un, there could be much of a compromise because he tried compromise once in Hanoi. And what he suggested was a really big step forward. I didn't expect them to suggest to close the complex, which is a very big one, and it's the heart of North Korean nuclear program. In fact, if they would have done it, their progress in acquiring new weaponry and new nuclear materials would be just marginal. And I believe, as far as I know, that not everybody in the North Korean leadership, especially the military, supported this move. But Kim took his own responsibility, and he put his authority on stake, and he was rebuffed. And this is a deep personal insult that he's not going to do it again. I think, as far as he remembers this experience. I believe that what he wanted was, to become something like Vietnam for the United States, which also fought a war with Vietnam, but then they became not exactly friendly, but normal relations on a sort of anti-Chinese platform. That's what I think Kim's establishment's idea and strategy. That didn't work out, and I don't think it ever will. And Kim understands it now. As for number of the nuclear weaponry and delivery means, which of course Russia wouldn't like to see happen, because it also undermines their own security and it gives the pretext for US to keep more arms in the region. I think that the only way is to try to limit and to first thing, and second thing is to have a normal relationship. After all, even one terrorist with a vial of some anthrax is much more dangerous for the US than even a country which is which is not hostile. For example, nobody cares about say Pakistan or India being a threat to the United States, because they're countries with good relations. So I don't think North Korea would be eager to remain hostile country. So there are the two ways. First way to increase dialogue with North Korea to make it a sort of normal and non-threatable one, and second to reduce and limit the arms. Thank you. And as for six-party talks, I'm sorry. I think we'll speak about it tomorrow. But now, the most important thing I think is the start of the US-North Korean dealings. But of course, in the end, the final deal should be coordinated with all these six parties have most stakes here, and they can also provide guarantees for the fulfillment of the agreement. But this is quite a long way off.
Thank you. Guy, any comments on the six-party talks?
I really appreciate Georgi Toleraya's points here about the North Koreans feeling that they have strategic parity with the U.S. At this point. And I can't emphasize enough right now what's happened in the last month or 2 months. The Biden administration has appointed a new special envoy, someone with a lot of experience in the region. A career ambassador, Ambassador Kim, who was in Singapore, or who was instrumental in helping the Trump administration set up the Singapore summit. This is who the Biden administration picked to be the new envoy. And this envoy was in South Korea in recent days, giving overtures to the North Koreans saying, we want to talk, we want to talk. We really want to talk with you. Would you please talk with us? So there's an awareness on the U.S. side that Kim Jong-un feels like he was spurned in Hanoi and personally insulted. And the Biden administration's return to strategic patience, whether conservatives in Washington and the American domestic political game are going to criticize Biden or not, or whether they're concerns that Biden might not be interested in complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, the Biden administration is in power in Washington, and it's reaching out to the North Koreans repeatedly on the world stage, saying, we want to talk, no preconditions. And what are we getting in response from Kim Jong-un is we're getting Kim Jong-un's sister saying she's, insulted by the American overture. We're getting Kim Jong-un not responding. We're getting other top advisors in the regime saying, no way, there aren't going to be talks. So the Kim regime is at risk of basically looking belligerent. And when we compare it to other nuclear armed powers around the world, I think Pakistan is a really good example, because there's great concern in Washington about what to do about Pakistan and its nuclear weapons. The Pakistani government, if Washington says, hey, let's talk, we want to talk with you, the Pakistani government responds by saying, would you like to come to Islamabad and we'll roll out the red carpet, or could we come to the White House? We'd love to talk with you. So there's, when it comes to the idea of six-party talks, at some point, the onus of responsibility falls on the North Koreans, the same way that it falls on the North Koreans to allow some aid into the country to prevent starvation, the North Koreans could say, we'll only allow Chinese and Russian aid in. That's it. All the humanitarian aid has to go through Russia and China. How would the West respond to that? We don't want people to starve in North Korea. We want COVID vaccines to go in. So the onus at some point, it's the same with talks. If the North Koreans say, we'll only do 6-party talks, no more just talking with the Americans or the South Koreans unilaterally. We only want 6-party talks. The Americans want dialogue at this point. They wanted it when they had a conservative government in the White House. They want it now that they have a liberal government in the White House. At some point, the onus is on the North Koreans to say, let's have dialogue.
Thank you. Doug, you had something?
Yeah, I think Guy is absolutely right. The response of Kim, and I mean, the last time delivered by his sister, who has done this in the past, was a very strong rejection of, I think, an extraordinarily important overture, with Ambassador Kim making it very clear this administration is not sitting around waiting for the North Koreans. This administration wants to engage them. So I think that we may want to talk about 5-party talks. Any kind of a peace regime in the region is going to require the involvement of Russia, of Japan, of China, as well as the US and South Korea. That's inevitable. And we might go ahead and tell the North Koreans, look, we would love to talk to you in any forum and any format. It can be one-on-one, it can be 2-on-1, whatever you want, we're willing to do. And if you don't want to, we're going to talk to everybody else here, because we all have a stake in a peaceful Northeast Asia. We all have a stake in a North Korea that's successful, a North Korea whose people are taken care of, a North Korea that's part of this larger peaceful order. We all want that. I think we would want to hold that out. Maybe that would encourage them to join. There may be internal dynamics we're not aware of. I mean, now there's concern about Kim's health. I mean, he's losing weight. I mean, that could be good. Maybe it's not good. We don't know. They've made some changes in coming up with essentially a deputy head of the party. There's talk about, does that so there's, internally we look through a glass darkly, unfortunately, in trying to see what's going on. But I think Guy is absolutely right that ultimately we can't make the North Koreans do what they should do. What we want to do is provide them with every opportunity and make it very clear it's not us who are holding things up. If Chairman Kim wants sanctions relief, if Chairman Kim wants economic growth, we are ready to work with him. And and others in the region are as well. And let's hold that out. And my hope is that they will eventually reciprocate.
Very good. One final question. UPF has been supporting, and I know there's some very significant support inside Russia for the developing the friendship and further economic trade between Russia and the US. And in part, a proposal has been made for a Bering Strait tunnel and bridge to connect Alaska and Russia for trade. Any thoughts on that? Dr. Tolaraya?
That might be a very symbolic initiative, although, there's not much of a trade potential in these areas. And I find it more just to reestablish the normal channels for communication in economic cooperation. And the first step, the most important obstacle to this are U.S. sanctions, because no U.S. bank can cooperate with Russian banks, and even I encountered that even the third countries bank which are related to U.S. financial system refuse to deal with Russian banks, and so how can we find a solution unless there is some kind of a change in this situation?
Very good. Okay, Guy or Doug, on that issue or any other final comments?
I think that I agree. These are symbolic initiatives. The idea of that type of a project, from a realist perspective, I think it's almost fantastic to unless there's a private American interest behind it. The idea of having that type of an infrastructure project happen I think it's just unrealistic. But that doesn't mean that it's not positive to talk about it, because if you have a positive symbolic initiative like that, it becomes an opening for positive dialogue about something, even if it's a fantastic idea. And I think that the US and Russia need openings to have positive dialogue now more than ever. I think I look at the US-Russia relationship as being, it still hasn't even gotten into a healing place yet. The wounds of the last 6 or 7 years of revanchist Russian policy, the Americans aren't awake to the point that Georgie was making here, that after the Cold War, there was a lot of animosity in Russian society, in Russian civil society, that the Americans were downgrading Russia's status in the eyes of the Americans. That animosity is still there. Vladimir Putin's revanchist posture is derived from that. It draws its momentum from that. And this kind of clash that we've had of the last decade, the last 5 years particularly, is all tied to that. And I don't think we're in a healing space yet. So these initiatives are, I talk of something like a tunnel from Alaska to Russia. We need things like that to rally around, to create dialogue that's positive. The last one I'll say is as dark and gloomy as it is, the idea of a joint effort to combat climate change. This is divisive in the US, but it's a common interest of the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans to try and address the issue of climate change. The problem is, do you put climate change out in front of something like strategic stability and nuclear arms agreements architecture? Or do you use it as an excuse, for instance, to not talk about strategic stability? Those are some of the issues on the table going forward.
Good.
Not everybody share the views on climate change in Russia,
I don't have a good sense of the logistics. It strikes me, given the climate in the Straits, that these are probably be difficult projects. I think that Guy has the right idea, which is this is the kind of thing that could move us to talk about the essentials of the relationship. I mean, the starting point to me is we've got to start backing away from sanctions, that if you want to have a commercial relationship, even rolling back a couple of them would be the start of a positive relationship that can get us to talk about what kind of investments, what kind of projects can we work on together that could be very helpful. And I think the symbolism of can we connect ourselves, because there is something unique about a bridge where there's that feeling that we really are suddenly one continent as opposed to separated continents, that I think that visual is very powerful. And that I think could be very helpful. And I hope this administration, that at least the tone that was set between Biden and Putin allows us to start thinking about, okay, what are things that we would be prepared to do? What would we want Russia to do? Can we start to pull back from this mutual animosity that we've had, which is in neither country's interest? And I think, again, going beyond politics, the commercial relationships could be very useful. I'd love to see us move in that direction.
Final point, 1 minute each, if you would just comment on your advice for the Biden administration in relation to North Korea and relations with China and Russia. Any advice you'd like to give? Just a short thought on that.
I'm happy to quickly go first, and it's very simple. I think the Biden, what I'm seeing, even though the Biden foreign policy hasn't calcified yet, we're just past 100 days, a month or so ago, we're not quite there. We're still in the first year. But what I'm seeing is that when it comes to China and it comes to Russia and that dynamic of US, China, Russia, what Biden wants is not, and what he's trying to get, it looks like so far, is not so different from what the Trump administration wanted and what Donald Trump wanted. It's just Biden's style is really, really very different. It's much softer. It's pandering to the left to a degree. But the U.S. grand strategic interests are the same. And I think that's something that we should consider going forward here. Is is the Biden administration? My advice would be to remember the mantra of peace through strength, and that my advice to the Biden administration, although I am a neutral journalist covering it, trying to be, is not to be too weak. To remember that America has this tremendous power, particularly in the military, economic, diplomatic, and informational realms, and not to pander to autocracy, or not. And I don't think the Biden administration is doing that, but it would be my encouragement. I have this discussion with various people in the administration about this as a journalist now. And I think there's awareness in the administration of that. But that would be my advice, is not to turn soft.
Dr. Toloraya, any advice for the Biden administration?
Well, just to be short, I just repeat what I said. Do something practical. For example, the sanctions on the three of these countries.
Very good. Okay. Dr. Bando.
I think the reality is that if we have a bad relationship with China and Russia, we can't expect a lot from them in terms of dealing with North Korea. That from their standpoint, they don't have a lot of incentive to help us if they perceive we are, going after them in other ways. I think second is to realize that there's a limitation on how much they can do. That North Korea is independent; it is not controlled by them. They influence it, but that North Korea is on its own. It's always been on its own. So I would certainly try to work with them, but realize it's going to have to be conducted in context of our larger relationship, and that ultimately what we do with North Korea is going to depend on us, and it's going to depend on the North Koreans. That let's worry about what we can control and be realistic about that, and then realize that it's going to be out of our hands at some point.
Well, we certainly want to go ahead, Dr. Georgi.
Just a small bit about North Korea. There's a lot of public and experts both in China, I think, and in Russia, which still believe that the final goal of U.S. in Northeast Asia is just eliminating North Korea, making it disappear. So, with a mood like this, how can we frankly tell North Koreans, you should be more friendly, more forthcoming? It's just very difficult to be frank, and frankness is the most important thing we have in relation with North Korea.
Thank you to all of our panelists. It's been an excellent session, and we want to invite all of you back soon. We are now going to go to our next session at 2 p.m., and we will have another panel of experts. And we thank also our European counterparts with UPF there, Dr. Jacques Marion and Mark Brand, and also our Russian UPF family there. Very, very grateful for your engagement and bringing so many Russians to the program. We certainly look forward to a strong friendship and alliance by solving these problems, and hopefully North and South Korea can finally come back together in a peaceful manner, as they are one culture and one people. We thank all of you, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you to our audience.